go ahead and get going here. We'll see how this goes. So good morning, everyone. For those of you I have not had the chance to meet yet, although you've seen me running around all morning, I am Leonard Rosenthol. I am the Senior Principal Architect for PDF and the Document Cloud here at Adobe. I'm not physically in this building, but at least company-wide. So what I want to talk about this morning is about search. I want to talk about search in general, and of course I want to then move into the specific realm of searching documents and searching PDFs. And sort of look at this in a couple of different ways. I want to talk about it from a technology perspective, so to give everyone a good background in search and some of the things that come into play when you think about search. Some things you may have thought about, some things you may not. And then of course we'll dive into some of the specifics of searching PDFs and what is being done out there, what is not being done out there, what hopefully people should be thinking about, or what we'd like people to be thinking about as they're making PDFs available through various searching means. Okay, so the obvious question is, how hard can it be? Google has been out 20 some odd years. I didn't look it up at this point, but PDF does predate Google. So it's not more than 25, that much I know. But it's been a long time, and of course we have Bing, and we have lots of we have Spotlight on the Mac, and we have the integrated Windows search. All of your devices have it. Everybody's got it. I mean, what most people do, in fact, to find content today or to find things, the vast majority of the way content is what folder did I put it in? You start clicking through. Chances are you probably click, on the search box on your device, whatever it is, and you start typing something in and you expect it to come out. It is just the norm for how people look for stuff. So this should be easy. It should be something that, and again, it's something we expect. But sometimes we are willing to take, to quote David from this morning, good enough. As good enough. And I want to talk about why I believe very strongly, especially when it comes to PDF and documents, it's not good enough. So let's take a look at what actually makes search work. So the sitting behind a search engine is what's generally referred to as an index. This is the thing that has collected all of the information from all of the stuff that you want to search. And that's why you'll also hear the verb, you indexed something. And again, this is probably not new to most of you. But obviously, every time something changes, every time there is a new thing, that has to be added to the index. And we're going to talk about that because that obviously will play a role as part of the thinking that goes into building one of these systems. How much of this do you want to store? Certainly in today's world, we don't think about size as much. We just assume that there are, terabytes and petabytes and more of data out there, but it still costs. Even if you're throwing that data up in the Amazon cloud or the Google or Microsoft cloud, you're paying for that data. How much of this do you want to store? How quickly do you want that information accessed? How fast do your users expect your search to be? How immediate, how responsive, if you will, does that information come back? We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about things like while you type. Some things, again, we're kind of gotten used to from engines like Google or Spotlight or the like. But, is it really reasonable to expect those sorts of things? And again, also, how easy is it to update and maintain that index? And all of these things play into what we have to figure out and what we want to bring to bear in our solutions. Now, we definitely have an index. What is it we're putting in that index? And this gets very interesting because it makes us think about, we can't just sort of throw things in there. It's not free form, even though if you look at something like Evernote, for example, you might think that it's just free form because you can throw anything into a note in Evernote, for example, and you can search it and it just works. It's what you expect in OneNote and similar products. But the fact of the matter is, under the hood, the developers of that had to make a decision about what they were indexing, how they were indexing it, and of the things they were indexing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, what's searchable and what do you then want to get back and operate on. And these are all parts of what we need to think about as we put this stuff together. So do you want to structure? So usually you want to structure it. You don't want something free-form. You don't just want to throw in, here's a blob o text, and just expect it to work. You can do that. It's actually not uncommon to just say, here's a blob of text and get the results. But if you do that, then you really can't do other things we'll talk about shortly, like filtering and sorting, because you have no structure to that information. So it's extremely important that we structure that information. In today's world, that's usually in a JSON grammar. Historically, that might have been in XML, it might have been in some other mechanism. Today, pretty much all of the databases want to work in JSON, unless you're Google. Google believes that everything in the world, and this will come into play a little later, looks like, smells like, touches, feels like HTML. And if it doesn't, they will go to great lengths to make it that way. And if you consider who they are and what they do, that's not unreasonable, again, except in a few places as it will become very understandable. But in general, you still have to have some form of structure, something that you understand and can work from. Okay, so I'll keep using Google, so obviously the norm example when it comes to searching. If you consider all the things you can search the web, you can search images, you can search videos, you can search your maps. As I mentioned, you think these things are optimized for the content in question. But at the end of the day, they're still all HTML as far as Google is concerned. Now, that just means that your video is wrapped inside of an HTML wrapper. Your image is wrapped inside, or at least the information about that image and about your video and about your shopping and all of these other things all get wrapped inside that one format that it understands. And if you look at something, if you're familiar with schema.org, schema.org is an effort to create schemas, specifically, if you will, micro schemas for individual things. If you use, I'll give you an example of how this plays out. If you use Gmail, okay, you might have noticed that over the last few years, when you bring up certain email messages, you get these little graphics at the top. You see this, for example, I have a flight coming up, and it shows you the flight up at the top. Okay, nicely formatted. The reason that works is because there's a blob of JSON according to a schema.org schema in your email, which is HTML. That same stuff works on the web. There's lots of this stuff out there. And so by putting these JSON schemas, according to schema.org, in their pages, this is how they get extra information that can be indexed and tracked. And this is good as a concept, and it works obviously very well for them and for Bing and for the web. But now we want to think about how that's going to play out in our documents as we move forward. Okay, so here we go. So what does this mean for documents? How do documents index today? You've got all those PDFs up in Google and the web. You've got OneDrive. You've got Dropbox. All of these, content providers who are making your content available. What are they indexing? And does it matter whether or not a long-form document is indexed the same way as a presentation is indexed the same way as a spreadsheet? Does that matter? Is that information important in the context of indexing? And I would put forth the answer is yes, it absolutely does. Unfortunately, today, that's not how they think about the world. As I said, today, basically, there are two ways that people look at indexing documents. One is the lowest common denominator, and unfortunately, the most common mechanism for doing that, and that's plain text, which is let's use a tool like Apache Tika. Let's suck out the text. Let's throw that into Elasticsearch and index it. And there's an example. That is the official documentation for any Elasticsearch-based implementation, and that's what Amazon is deploying. So anybody that's using Amazon search behind, Amazon web search behind their site, that's what they're getting. They're building it then into their apps. That's what you're doing. You're taking an open source library that knows how to suck text out of your format and then index it. No semantics, no metadata, no rich understanding, just plain text. And again, you're also hoping that that text is properly structured. And those of you who sat through the previous session and some of the other ones who understand about structure and semantics know that that's just going to fail. It works, but it's limiting for all the obvious reasons. The next step up for that, as I mentioned, is what Google and Bing and some other folks do, and that is you take HTML. So at least in HTML, you've got some structure. You've got some basic semantics that go along with your content. It also means that you're not just indexing text. You can index images. You can index other things. You also have, as we just talked about, mechanism for metadata. So now, that's not PDF metadata, as we'll talk about, but at least it's a mechanism for metadata. So at least it's a step up. Unfortunately, that's as far as 90-some% of the search engines go today. And this has been, again, we've said search, 20 plus years or more if you go far enough back in time. They're not making any greater strides in recent times. In fact, I would actually argue they're going backwards. For example, it recently came to my attention that Google has decided that your PDFs are not good enough. So every PDF that Google indexes, they don't even bother looking at the text in the document. They turn it into a bunch of images, run it through their OCR engine, and index the text that comes out of their OCR system. Because they believe that will give them better content than what you put in. Okay? Don't all run screaming, because I know I did. Okay, that's just, we all know that is bad on so many levels. But, you know, that's their world. And this is what I'm hoping we can start thinking about how we can, and I think this sounds crazy, but how do we beat Google at their own game? How do we beat these big search engines by actually showing our customers and telling the world there are just better ways to search content? Okay, so let's look at a couple of other interesting things as we talk about the queries themselves. So am I doing on time? Alrighty. You want to search for the word sink. You've got phrase searching. You've got Boolean searching. And then, of course, you also have to consider things like, if I search for kitchen sink, does sink in kitchen also match? And if that's important to you, that also goes back to indexing, because how you structure your index will implicate whether or not these are words that match. The other one, which I'll point out here, and it comes back a little later, is what happens if kitchen and sink are on two separate pages in a PDF. So it just happens that that's where the page break occurs. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that. Filtering. Filtering is where you can add extra queries, extra things to it. So search, again, this is out of Google, but I want to search I only want to search PDFs, or I only want to search PowerPoints. I want to look only in English content or German content, etc. These are called filters. You know, things you can apply to your search. So, and then you combine all of these together. When you actually issue a search query, this is what something looks like behind the scenes. So, and I'll use Acrobat as an example. Hopefully most, if not all of you, have used it or at least seen it. If you're on our homepage and you type in a search query, this is basically what it turns into. So I'm searching for the word sink. So I typed in sink, and that says search for the name sink, the file name sink, in a file of type PDF. So look for an extension of PDF, or the MIME type or content type is application PDF. I'd like you to sort that according to the name in ascending order, and then what's called a secondary sort by created in descending orders. Okay? So that means that, kind of going back to where we started, we've indexed this data, the name of the file and the creation date are two separate fields. We've indexed them, and we've identified them as things we want sortable. We've also identified the file extension and the content type as fields that we want to be able to search on also. And then what do I want returned? I want the name, the size, the content type, and the creation date. Okay? So this is an example, again, of what's happening behind the scenes. So this is the kind of information we feed to Elasticsearch. So talking about that technology that's being used, we're using Elasticsearch. This is data we feed into it. Okay? So for a simple file name search, obviously there's no content being reflected here. We're doing a simple file name search because there's a name : sink. Okay? So that shows you what something like that is going to look like. And from there, you build out. Okay. Now, so that's what I fed in. What do I get back? I get back my results. Those results need to be relevant, and they need to be ranked. So how do you do this? Okay, so we talked about sorting. This is the logical thing. This is the norm. Then you get into some very interesting things. So you may be familiar with Google PageRank. So Google PageRank is this neat idea he puts in quotes, that Google has that says, you know what? The social aspects of a page should influence where it shows up in the ranking order. And it changes, I would say daily, it probably changes minute by minute. There are companies who try to make money by helping you get higher in your Google PageRank, and it changes the next day. So nobody knows how that actually plays out, but it's this idea that you can change relevancy based on other criteria. So one of the ones that I think is most interesting that today nobody is actually doing, but they could. Consider that if you had more than just text. So let's even say we have HTML. In that HTML, we have all of the semantics, or at least basic semantics. I know what is a heading. I know what is body text. I know what a table is. I know what a list is. Why wouldn't a hit in a heading be a higher rank than a hit in body text? I would argue it should be. Okay? That's something that could be very easily implemented by a system that understands those semantics. They don't today. But I would put forth that if you've got it, use it. Otherwise, why are you bothering to store that information? All right. So let's get into the guts of PDF. I think we all know that PDF is a very complex standard. There's a lot to it. We've had some great presentations over the last few hours on exactly that topic, and I'm sure we will have more over the next day and a half. So, again, I'm not telling you things you don't already know, but PDF has those rich semantics. We have tagged PDF that give you both simple as well as structural semantics. So we want that rich semantics in there for the reasons that I've expressed, because we can use that information in a lot of different ways. We've got publishing elements. We've got footnotes and endnotes and indices and table of contents and such. We have links. We have raster and we have vector images. We have media. All of these things we want to index. Okay, we don't just want text, which is, again, what most people are doing today. How do we get all that information in there? Can we get it all into a single index? The answer is yes, you absolutely can, but you need to plan for it up front. If you don't, you're not going to be able to index these things. Or the worst case scenario is every time you change your index structure, you have to go back and re-index your data. Now, if it's 10 PDFs on somebody's desktop, that's not a big deal. If you are Dropbox, who gets, millions or tens of millions of new files every day added to their data system, that's a lot of work. You're getting, hundreds, thousands, millions of documents. Every one of those then having to be reindexed, that's time and that's cost, because it's not free to reindex. All right, so every one of those things has to be kept in mind. Always, always, always plan ahead. It's a good rule in general. All right, I mentioned the idea of split across pages. So what exactly is a page, and do you care when you index things? Unfortunately, the norm today is yes. The norm is that people index by page. So they take each page of your document and index that separately. Okay, that's a historical model of indexing. And it fails hugely when you're trying to find content that spans pages. It just does not work for obvious reasons. Works great if nothing is paginated. So that is one advantage to the idea of turning everything into HTML. There's no pages. Therefore, you never split by page. Of course, the downside of that is when you find something, how do you tell the user what page you found it on? Which is why they did it the other way to begin with. Okay? Now, you can have both, but you have to plan accordingly. So think about this, and again, this is why I flagged this as a common mistake. Don't think about pages as a physical thing that you want to index by. Think about the page as metadata. How is the page number any different than any other piece of information like the font? This piece of text has a font associated with it. It has a size, it has a color. It happens to have a page number. It's all related information. So keep that in mind. Again, we structure our index in that way. Hey, there we go, structure and tagging. So If we assumed that we could only leverage files that were previously tagged and previously prepared this way, the numbers are going up. That's good. We're seeing that number climb. PDF UA has been a big help in doing that. There are lots of great tools out there, a number of vendors of them here over the next 2 days who will help you take non-tagged PDF and make them tagged. And that's good, and that continues to improve it. You may have to do your extraction without tagging, but if you do, and I think we all know this, you will not necessarily get the results you want, and especially reading order, which comes in very significantly when you talk about searching, because if I have the word at the top of the page and the word at the bottom of the page next to each other in my search index, that's not right. So we have to keep in mind that tagging and structure as it relates in PDF is not just about semantics, it's also about reading order. It's about understanding what is there on the page, what is there in the document. So, and this is why things like that TICA process I talked about, where people just suck out the text, you get bad results, and that's why, and you see this very frequently. Metadata search. I talked about this before. Now, I would argue that any metadata is better than no metadata. So if you start with, say, docinfo, the classic metadata model of PDF, that'd be great. I would love to see people just index docinfo. If they would start with that, I would be happy. Guess what? Google doesn't bother because, as I said, they don't trust anything in your documents. They claim they know better than you do. So metadata is gone. Text is gone. Everything is gone. They're starting fresh. So, of course, it begs the question, why bother? But I think we know the answer to that. So I would love for at least people to start working with docinfo. Next step up, I would love for people to start indexing all your XMP, because especially in the world of PDFA, as many of you know, customers are putting their own custom metadata in the file. We spent a lot of time with the PDFA standard ensuring that customers could put their own custom metadata in there. There's a whole section of that standard that talks about custom metadata. Why are we enabling our customers to do this? Why are we enabling people to do this if we don't leverage it downstream? One thing, though, that comes out of this is today, the standard serialization of XMP is XML. That's what's defined in the standard, which is 16684-1 from the ISO. We are, however, working right now on a new part of that, part 3, which will be a JSON LD serialization of XMP. And we think that that will help promote more support of indexing and processing of XMP, because it will give them a more modern serialization. Doesn't change the data model, it's only about serialization. And that doesn't even then get us into embedded images and metadata. A lot of the images in your content today have embedded XMP. Wouldn't it make sense to be able to say something like, find every image with a copyright in all of my documents to make sure that your documents are in legal compliance? Or, of course, Adam at the back of the room is saying, find me the alt text, find me the alt text, so he can check for accessibility. Now, all of these things are pieces of important information we need to know about all of the parts of our documents. Okay, and then annotations. It was actually interesting. This just came out this week. There's this great article in Lifehacker about how to search your how to search the comments of a PDF, or more specifically, how not to. And this guy, the gentleman who wrote the article, went and tested every online system. He tested Google Drive and OneDrive and Dropbox and all of these systems to find out how to do this, and not a single one of them enabled him to do what to us should be obvious, which is, I've got a document with comments in it, and I want to find that document. So find that comment I wrote to Bill about his crazy project last year, okay? Seems like a logical search query. Seems like something you want to do. Cannot do it in any system today, but should be, and it seems perfectly reasonable. It was just, again, just coincidence that this article came out this week. And then attachment search. My colleague Dove gave a good presentation first thing this morning about open data and talked to you about how you could put all sorts of other pieces of information inside of your PDF. You want to be able to search for that. So, Dove showed a great example of his electric bill. He'd like to be able to find the specific electric bill with the specific usage that he had. How does he do that today? He can't. Emails. There's Duff Johnson, who spoke earlier this morning, is starting up a working group around archiving email as PDF. You're going to want to search all of those attachments of all of your email messages that you're going to be archiving, hopefully according to this work that's ongoing. Same problem. How do we get to those attachments? How do we make those part of your ongoing index? And let me just sort of wrap up a bit as we get to the end and talk about scale. Because I do want people to not think that this is trivial. If it were trivial, everybody would be doing it. But as we're now in a world of cloud scale and cloud usability, all of these things I've been talking about, not just the technical stuff. I mean, that's a given. We should solve the technical parts. But there's also the practical matter, which is users have expectations, rightly or wrongly so. For example, performance. As I said, if you upload a file to your Google Drive, how quickly do you expect to be able to find it? Should it be findable immediately? Is it okay if it takes 10 seconds, a minute, 10 minutes? What's acceptable before a file that's uploaded into your storage system shows up in a search result? How quickly do you expect that as a user? That plays out very strongly. How many pages? This is actually interesting. I was reading an article about this. Trying to remember who it was. Dropbox. So Dropbox actually implemented content search just recently to their system, maybe 6 months ago. They decided that users actually don't need every single word on every single page indexed. They decided that if they indexed only the first 10 pages of every document and no more, that would be okay and users would be able to find things. And that's what they did. And in fact, that's what they do today. Now, I don't know how well that's worked out for them. But it was interesting that the idea that they were willing to say you don't get everything in your documents indexed was a very big stake in the ground. So I thought that was a very interesting position to take. But it does go to size and scale, especially if you've got customers uploading 10,000 page documents or even 100 page documents, which is probably more realistic. What if you only got the first 10 pages indexed? And then, of course, robustness, scalability, availability, just normal cloud scale things. These all are part and parcel of our problem. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of where we are today, and sort of as I hinted in the title of this talk, why I still feel like we're in 1919. Just nobody has solved in 20 years of search. I mean, and search obviously goes back much further. But if we at least think about computer search, doesn't even get into searching in a library and card catalogs and all over. But if we think about 20 some odd years of computer search, okay, of digital content searching, I would argue absolutely nothing has changed. I would argue that if anything, and as I use Google as an example, it's gotten worse. Because we're not even getting our own content actually indexed anymore. They're never done metadata, slowly but surely, maybe their own stuff. Things other than text. How do we get and push the industry forward? And I know that I myself am very active in this. It's something that's very important to me. Some of you have heard me speak on this before, and it's something I feel very strongly about and working to solve. That's not a product announcement. That's just a position paper, if you will. But I hope that many of you can take this back, whether it's to your organizations, to your developers. Please start writing letters to Google, Microsoft, and whomever else, because I know that will help. Can't hurt, actually. And see what we can do. So thank you very much for listening to me sort of introduce you and maybe a little bit of personal ranting, if you will. And I'm around for the next couple of days and would love to chat with anyone. So thank you very much.